pass you the microphone. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction. That is me in a nutshell. There's so much more though than just that bio. We don't have time to get into even half of it today, unfortunately. But we have a great panel today. We have a really, it's a general topic, the regulatory landscape in Canada. I mean, we've got a panel made up of mostly lawyers, so I think we're going to be talking, hopefully not a lot of legalese, but general concepts, and we'll talk about, issues affecting businesses in Canada today. And so, thanks for reading my bio. I'm going to pass the mic, or you've got a mic already, and get everyone to spend 30 seconds on their bio. And at the end, if you want to tell the audience a fun fact, please feel free to do so.
Perfect. Good morning. My name is Melissa Smith. I'm a partner and the regional manager for the Calgary Business Group of Borden, Ladner, Gervais. We're a national law firm. My background is in securities law, so I do a lot of M&A transactions, a lot of equity financing, so raises through equity issuances, as well as listings and go public transactions. I got involved in crypto initially through personal interest, which I think a lot of people did sort of back in 2016, and have been interested and done a lot of research and work in the areas since then. Fun fact, I am a huge fan of all Broadway musicals, all of them. It's embarrassing.
Nice. That is fun. Fun fact.
Yeah, thanks. Really happy to be here. My name is Logan. I'm a partner with Thomson, a national law firm. In the crypto world, we're getting work from all over the world. It is super interesting. I'm leader of the entertainment, media, and blockchain world. I'm more of an entertaining lawyer than anything. But my fun fact is I played in a rock band from age 20 to 28 here in Western Canada. It was a lot of fun. And I decided to go to law school in 1978. And I was at my mom and dad's house. And these guys phoned me up and said, "Wait, we'd like you to play in our band. We're putting a new band together." And I went, "No, I'm going to go be a lawyer." And so yours truly turned down the job to be the keyboard player for Loverboy.
Oh my God, Wayne.
And working for The Weeknd was the biggest hit in the friggin' world 9 months later.
Wow, the decisions we make, that is the best fun fact I've ever heard. That is the winner, yeah, it's too bad, Wayne. We'll have to talk afterwards.
Can we get that up on this?
Yeah, Loverboy, I mean, that was a big hit.
I love a mic.
Hi, I'm Eacrett. I head operations and special projects with DB Chain, so we're one of the larger liquidity providers and OTC desks in the country. Before that, we've got about 15 years in proprietary trading, so maybe my not so fun fact, but my fact is I'm the non-lawyer on the panel, so take everything I say with a grain of salt.
And I just want to add here, there was something written on this paper I got before we got on stage about a fun fact of yours. So do you mind if I read it? We'll talk about it. Hello, I'm Ben, and I don't believe that every set of decisions, trade-offs, or problems in crypto should be framed as a trilemma. Fun fact.
Yeah, I also get triggered by crypto Twitter. So.
It's triggering for sure.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Katrina Prokopy. I am the Chief Legal Officer and Head of Regulatory Affairs at Coinsquare. Prior to Coinsquare, I was at the ASC in the Market Regulation Division as a lawyer and also as the Head of Market Oversight. Fun fact about me, I think it's going to pale in comparison to some of the ones we've just heard. I'm told that I'm the only person that works at a fintech company that still takes notes with a pen and paper and have no idea what Telegram is.
There you go. I wish I didn't know what Telegram is or Twitter. I don't know, I find them both huge time sucks. But I guess my fun fact is that it's not, like Katrina, it's not a hugely fun fact. I love horror fiction novels, so I get home from work after a tough day and just, my mind goes right into horror and I don't know, that helps me somehow. So, kind of weird, but anyway, okay, so now on to crypto regulation in Canada and regulatory trends. So Melissa, I'm going to start with you because you're the first lead here for the first question. So I guess generally, how have regulators in Canada struggled with regulating cryptocurrency and crypto assets since the advent of Bitcoin in 2009, how have regulators struggled with regulating crypto, really generally?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's unfair to say they've struggled. It's certainly been a learning curve, I think. For me, in my career anyway, this is the first time there's sort of a brand new asset class, and frankly, it's a complicated asset class. There's lots of different products that do very different things, and innovating at sort of the speed of light. So I think anyone would struggle sort of with that. I think the regulators have done a really, they've come a long way from where it started, if that makes sense. There's certainly, I'm sure, more to do, and there's always limited resources with any regulator. I mean, any person has limited resources. But if you think back to, the conversation people were having 5 years ago, it was, are these even securities? How do we tell if these are securities? Do the Securities Commissions have any authority over them? So, if you think about that conversation, how far away it was from what is happening now, I think there's been a ton of progress. Absolutely more to go. I think part of the problem is, by its nature, the securities regulators have to react to innovation. We probably don't want a regulator that sits around thinking of what might happen and how it might be used and thinking of hypotheticals. I don't know that that's a good use of anyone's time. And I don't know that it creates regulations that are tailor-made for actual use of technology and actual products that are coming out. So, we've seen the initial regulation of the ICOs. I think a lot of focus has been on platforms and exchanges, obviously, in the last few years. And that is a little bit because of some very public failures in that space in Canada. And also, I think it was a way to reach a lot of people. If you have limited resources, you want to regulate areas that affect the most number of people. So they've really focused on that. So I do think there has been progress. I mean, huge education curve for everyone in this space, I think. I think everyone in this room probably has done a ton of education and spent hundreds of hours, understanding new technologies. But yeah, I think, that they're making progress and there's definitely ways to go, so.
Great answer. Thank you. Yeah, I guess I feel like I'll just back up about regulation in general. So securities laws is where a lot of the action is in Canada. And each province and territory in Canada has its own Securities Act. And so each province has its own securities regulator. And that's fundamentally different from the US, where they have a federal securities regulator. So we might hear about us talking about the CSA, that's the Canadian Securities Administrators. That's an umbrella group of the provincial and territorial regulators who have got together and meet and put out staff notices on certain issues. So one comment I have is on progress. I feel like the questions that I get when a new client calls me are the same issues as that I was advising on in 2017, 2018 to an extent. Is this a security? Can we do a distribution out of Canada? Is that going to, clear us? So in some ways, I feel like I'm constantly repeating things. And then at the same time, other things have changed. So we've seen, DeFi and new iteration, different issues with NFTs that were around a few years ago. So there's definitely new things popping up, but a lot of the same issues, I feel like, coming up. Wayne, I'm just going to go along this way. Wayne, do you have any comments on that?
Well, first of all, I find it incredibly interesting. We've been at it for about 6 years.
And I gotta say that I'm very fortunate because I have the best legal team in the friggin' world that understands this, with Alyssa and JD here. What we do is we get together and put our creative hats on, and to fit what is being requested by clients into the regulatory framework, because you don't want to fight the framework, you got to work with it. And we sing songs, get our creative juices going, and then we analyze.
Play guitar?
Keyboards. And it's working. So we're having a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's my point here is you got to be creative and have it fit in, and you can.
Ben, comments? What you see?
Yeah, I mean, I'd really echo what some panelists have already said. Just the sector is continuously innovating and moving as fast as it can, and I'm guessing most of the people in the room are working in companies that are trying to innovate and keep up. And that's just, you can empathize with the struggle for how do you figure out how to regulate as the industry is already moving and has no interest in slowing down, nor should it. So how do you bring regulation in a responsible way but still foster innovation? And that's, I mean, I think that's got to be the biggest thing the regulators have been struggling with, if you want to put it that way. But it's, you know, it's a pretty legitimate struggle, because I think, you know, we work internationally too, and we deal with this in every jurisdiction that we deal with. And what's kind of refreshing in Canada is at least we have a framework to go with. You know, we know what triggers, you know, registration. We know what has to fall under a regulated entity, and we know what falls outside. So, you know, the struggle's working. You know, it's moving forward, and it's helping us be able to progress at least, and have a little bit more certainty about the future, because there's a lot of jurisdictions where we just don't know.
Right. It's interesting, yeah. Like we do have some level of certainty in Canada, and the Canadian securities regulators, I think, have been more vocal than the SEC. So I think we've seen more guidance come out on how securities regulatory staff see the interpretation of law, and then as compared to the US. So I think you're right. I think it should make businesses a bit more comfortable in Canada, and because it's not really gray anymore for a lot of issues. It's actually pretty black and white. Like, so the argument that, well, you know, we didn't know what we were doing, we didn't know how the law applies, our lawyer didn't know, I don't really think you can make that argument with a lot of strength in Canada right now in 2022. Katrina, do you want to comment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to echo what Ben said, I think that Canada has come out very, you know, quickly with their position on what the regulatory framework for crypto assets will be, unlike many other international jurisdictions. So I think that's something to really be proud of. I mean, the staff notices both in terms of asserting the basis of jurisdiction, and then followed by the guidance on what the regulatory framework would be. I mean, I think that puts us ahead of many of the other jurisdictions. And now it's sort of, you know, how is that framework being applied? I think other signs of, you know, progress are things like the new pre-registration undertaking approach that's been adopted by the CSA, which I understand to be sort of a effort to communicate, you know, the rules of engagement for crypto asset trading platforms so that they're transparent and known. So I think there's been a lot of development, and Canada's been very proactive in this space.
Thank you. Those pre-registration undertakings, so that's another really good point, and something that I think is uniquely Canadian. So you're a crypto exchange, you're dealing in securities. You know that there's sometimes a lag between the time that you submit your application for registration as a restricted dealer. You know, it's usually more than a few months, right? It can sometimes stretch over 12 to 18 months. And so there was a question in Canada of, you know, like, can we still operate? I mean, we've been operating. Now we're trying to comply. We submitted our application for registration. We're in a queue. We're waiting for months. Can we still operate? And lawyers didn't really have a black and white answer. So the regulators actually helped us through a bone and said, you know, here's this process where you can continue to operate, notwithstanding that you don't have your registration yet, if you submit an undertaking where you promise to do and not do certain things. And the conditions of the undertaking kind of mirror the conditions that and terms that you'll be subject to once you're registered. So that was an example where I think the regulators saw there was a gap in not in the legislation, but there was a practical issue that faced a lot of platforms, and they put forth a plan. And so, yeah, I understand Coinsquare was one of the first exchanges to file a pre-registration undertaking. These are publicly filed. So yeah, I guess good on the regulators for that. And it allows businesses to keep operating, and notwithstanding that they technically aren't registered yet. Katrina, I just want to start this next question with you. So each province has its own Securities Act. They have a different regulator. There are differences sometimes in how the provinces approach certain issues. Like there are slight differences in the legislation from province to province. So, you know, given that, it's reasonable to assume that there might be differences in how each of the provinces apply their legislation or the policies of the different provinces. So what do you think about Ontario and its regulatory regime and you know, any issues it's faced over the last few years that are particular to Ontario, or is there anything that Ontario has been doing that differentiates itself from the other provincial regulators?
Yeah, I think that, the first point to make is that the regulatory framework is the same. That the communication by the CSA, both from 21 through 27 and 21 through 29, which set out the regulatory framework, was embraced by the entirety of the CSA, not certain provinces and other provinces. So in theory, the same rules and requirements apply, the same national instruments and rules apply across Canada. I think the exception to that is the position on investment limits, which platforms have to apply to client accounts for non-specified crypto assets. And Ontario and the rest of the jurisdictions have adopted investment limits. And I think it's Alberta, BC, Quebec, and Manitoba that have not. Apart from that differentiation and that policy position, the regulatory framework should be consistent across the CSA. And in fact, that is the mandate of the CSA, is to achieve, harmonized application of the rules for market participants, so they don't have to face, disparate requirements across the jurisdictions given our federalist structure. So I think what we've seen a bit, though, is perhaps a stronger and swifter approach taken in Ontario to the application, not that it's a different regulatory framework, but to the application of that framework. And I think that is slightly problematic in the sense that it's confusing to industry and leads to unlevel playing field issues.
Yeah, I mean, so it leads also to an issue where, we have a lot of international crypto exchange platforms that are located in offshore jurisdictions that are soliciting to Canadian users. And, one of them, there's an enforcement action against one of them. And it seems to be, there's been enforcement actions against a few of these international platforms. And it seems like Ontario is leading the charge with the enforcement. So the problem that I've seen with that is people might think, well, this exchange is banned in Ontario, but it's like legal in Alberta. And that's actually not the truth, right? That's not the case. It's not legal anywhere, but it's just that Ontario has chosen to enforce the legislation and commence an enforcement action. So that can cause confusion. And I've had to kind of, sort that out with some clients.
Yeah, no, I echo that. And I think the inconsistency in approach manifested like that, it is confusing to industry.
Yeah.
With our clients, we've been on a variety of Zoom calls with ASC, OSC, and we found them reasonable and just being thorough. So there may be, internal differences that we're maybe not aware of, but I personally, and I don't think our team does, have any issues with it being an ASC or OSC or in these other securities with what we're doing.
Interesting. Melissa, do you see any differences in the application between the
I think
provincial
every
regulators?
commission sometimes has its own, personality for sure. Like there's differences in dealings with different commissions. I echo everything you said. It's the same regulations with some exceptions, but for the most part, same regulations. CSA has led the charge. I think at the end of the day, though, I don't think there's really going to be entities that are not going to operate in Ontario. So we do need to deal with Ontario. Like I know there's been some jurisdiction shopping for who your principal regulator is. I think that does happen. But Ontario still has a huge population, and a lot of our financial markets are in Ontario. So I think, it just shows that as much as we do have provincial regulators, I think we need to work with all of them, and they are cooperating through CSA staff notices. And
Yeah. I was just going to say, like, isn't it the case, Katrina, that an application with one provincial regulator or principal regulator, like, has to be for an exchange, has to be vetted amongst the other provinces? So it's not like.
I think it's a bit of a misconception. I think two points I'd make. One is the principal regulator model operates such that there's rules around determining who your principal regulator is. So it's not a matter of picking your principal regulator. I suppose if you are net new and you're thinking about where you want to set up shop in Canada, in that sense, you can choose a jurisdiction that you might perceive to be more hospitable than another jurisdiction from a regulatory perspective. But
If you're an existing crypto business, market participant, then your mind and management is where it is, and you can't pick a different, you can't forum shop your PR. And the second point to make is exactly what you said. I think that it's very difficult to avoid a jurisdiction from a regulatory perspective if you want to operate. And by that, I mean access clients in that jurisdiction. So, and the nature of these businesses and the technology is such that, even if you perceived one jurisdiction to be friendlier to crypto generally than another jurisdiction like Ontario, to the extent that you offer your services to Ontario users, the OSC has jurisdiction and an interest in investor protection, and you're going to need the approvals there too. So you can't avoid that.
I mean, just coming back on some of the things that were brought up about level playing field, and to your point too, Matt, like one big thing that we see, from our side of the business that's different is just how the different securities commissions, their opinions on some of the different assets people can actually trade, because there is different coin offerings allowed and supported in some of the different jurisdictions. And, it would be nice if we could get that a little more unified across the country. And the other one, which is, I commend the OSC for being more aggressive on trying to, let's say go after foreign or non-registered exchanges and try to make a bit more of a level playing field for everybody in the country. But that has also led to, again, a lot of disparity, say from our side of the business, and then this goes and impacts everybody down the street is, we're a big liquidity provider. We're set up in Ontario. Even though like the way we're set up and registered and like we're a permitted client, we should be able to deal with all those exchanges. But as soon as Ontario started sending out letters to the various international exchanges, all of a sudden, anyone who's institutionally dealing with them also had to restructure their businesses and could no longer deal with them out of Ontario. Whereas if we'd been situated in Alberta, we could have still, we wouldn't have had the same friction come into the business that way.
Yeah, that's one of the unfortunate consequences of having the kind of regulatory system we have, where the provinces have autonomy over their securities laws. But yeah, I mean, it makes for interesting work for lawyers. So I think lawyers have benefited from that. I don't know, the disparity in the provinces. I guess, but it's not helpful for business. I mean, I hope that one thing that I want to see a bit more is maybe a bit more consultation. If we look at other industries, like the contract for difference securities and some other non-crypto related products that seemed in the past few years ago to get a lot more consultation. There were a lot more consultation papers and then feedback from the public. Like with crypto, it's such a huge industry, right? Like it's $1 trillion industry, but we have 21327 and then 21329, the two major consultation papers. So I'd like to see another consultation paper maybe on some other issues. I'm kind of getting sidetracked, but it just goes to the point of maybe knowing what all the regulators' positions are on different other asset classes. So just talking about the differences in the provinces. Wayne, you're based in Calgary. You're based in Alberta. I am as well. I know that the provincial government in Alberta has been pushing hard to try to make Alberta a destination, cryptocurrency and blockchain destination for the rest of Canada and the world. I think that's a great thing. Personally, I think it's very progressive, and I hope the next government continues to do that in Alberta. And continues to push for that. Wayne, my question is, so Alberta has appeared to embrace cryptocurrency. It's led to a significant number of companies relocating to Alberta, or US companies or international companies choosing to locate their head office in Alberta. Why has the province become so attractive for the industry?
Yeah, good. Thanks for that question. We represent a variety of international clients that are in the crypto ecosystem. And they're coming to Alberta, and it's not because of the ASC versus the OSC. It's about the quality of life here. And number one, and I know this is a fact, it's the Canadian Blockchain Consortium. What we're doing here in this province, led by the Canadian Blockchain Consortium and
Here,
across
here.
Canada. And we have a whole bunch of international people here in support. We're setting up chapters in BC. Matthew and I are directors, and I would say that's number one. I would agree with you on the political climate, the taxation climate. I know that our group, CBC, is really pushing for a minister, a provincial minister to be appointed for a digital asset type minister. We're working with the Minister of Culture closely on the NFT world in the film and entertainment industry. And there's well, we don't know if the minister's staying or not, but there's a big push with the Minister of Culture to really get involved with this. So what am I trying to say here? The taxation system, Calgary, the weather sometimes, and the music scene.
And the music scene. Potential Loverboy band member. I've heard that too, actually, I've been asked that question before. And when you poll industry, it's a number of different factors, right? I mean, we have, I think, the lowest provincial tax in Canada. Alberta has traditionally been pro-business. I'm from Winnipeg originally, and we always thought of Alberta as being, really pro-business, private enterprise, and cost of living. I know people from Toronto who have relocated here, and I mean, they get a really nice house here. It's a good quality of living. The oil industry has, significantly increased everyone's earnings, and everyone's salary, I think, is higher here because of the oil and gas industry. And prices are higher for some things as a result of that. So I think there's a lot of different factors.
If I could just jump back in, Alberta is a leader with the laws that are available for carbon credit sequestration. I was very interested to learn that Ontario doesn't have those laws. So what's happening here is well poised to be accurately tracking the carbon that is being sequestered, be it agricultural, timber, or obviously oil and gas. And the number of clients that we're seeing and interested opportunities in the carbon credit token business is amazing, and Alberta is a world leader in that.
Yeah, I've acted for a few similar types of projects. Really interesting. I think there's going to be more of that, and it's interesting how NFTs play a part in that and in tokenizing carbon credits. It's just, I think we've only seen the tip of the iceberg as far as what NFTs can be used for, and I can't wait to see what the next few years will bring. As we expand into different asset classes. But before we jump into, NFTs and stablecoins and other things, because we're going to talk about those and regulatory trends in the future. Ben, did you have any comment on Alberta at all?
Yeah, I think we're missing one of the big points is Alberta's been more banking friendly for crypto than anywhere else by a landslide, right?
Yeah.
And I know a lot of our counterparties have moved offices here purely because ATB's been great. A number of the credit unions have been great, and then back to the ASC and allowing firms here, one way or another to progress. They're staking at us on the platforms here. So it's evidence like that makes others want to locate here so they can, move faster on their innovation and bring stuff to retail clients that, everybody deserves to have access to.
That's awesome. That's really good to hear that, from a business perspective, that's happening, that there's that much attention being paid to Alberta. I completely agree. Staking is a fascinating topic. I think we're probably going to see hopefully some CSA guidance on staking in the next little while. I know that I think there is a world where staking can be done in a compliant manner, as long as the staters follow certain terms and conditions. Katrina, I don't know if you've got any, just maybe on Alberta or.
Yeah, I mean, I just picking up on your point, I think we will see guidance on staking more in the way of terms and conditions on orders that will approve staking services. And that will be indicative of the regulator's position on staking. I think, again, the level playing field is a problem. I think if you are a platform that is located in a province where the rules are potentially being applied a bit differently or less aggressively than other jurisdictions. I think the harmonization throughout the CSA in respect of any of these services and new initiatives or sort of developments in the technology and offerings of crypto asset trading platforms need to be available and applied equally throughout the CSA.
Yeah. Ben, I'm going to ask you a question here about so other types of products or other types of businesses besides exchanges. So how do you see the future in Canada as far as regulation is concerned or business in general around assets like NFTs and stablecoins?
Yeah, I don't know. Problem is my answer for these changes like every week. Probably it just keeps moving and moving. For those different assets, I think it's complicated, right? Like as you've talked about before, you think there's a big future in NFTs. I totally agree with you, and we're seeing a lot of innovation in that space starting to come up. It's definitely one of those spaces where you're seeing people start to figure out what can I do that brings value beyond just a JPEG, right? Like real estate shares, all sorts of real property you've talked about. There's some interesting projects in carbon footprints and carbon sequestration and credits. But they're a really tricky one to regulate, right? So I see that taking quite a while, frankly, because you're gonna have to evaluate every single one of them as to whether it's a security, whether it's not, what's the utility, what does it bring? That's a pretty complicated landscape. Another area we're seeing a ton of innovation in is crypto derivatives, and bringing some really interesting things. Some that are basic building blocks that we see in all other asset classes, where you're starting to see swap mechanisms and ways to get yourself fixed rate versus floating rate. And then again, lots of perpetual swaps is a great example of an innovation that came in the crypto space, and it's just a brilliant instrument that you should be able to apply to more assets. But of course, it's a derivative, so the whole regulatory framework does have to. Maybe you can argue it's clear, right? Like derivatives need to be regulated if they're being offered by platforms in the country, but we still need to do some more work with the regulators to make sure everyone's comfortable with that framework, that instrument, where we can use it. And the other big place that I think we all want to see a little bit, we're looking forward to the progression in it, is in custody, right? Custody is such an important part of all of this. Custody is what really protects everybody. One of the great moves with the frameworks that have been put out, having trading platforms need to use actual approved custodians was a huge step, right? I know it's a bit against crypto native ethos, right? And the whole not your keys, not your coins. But how many people do we know that should also be their own bank, right? Most of the people in the room here are comfortable with it, but most of the people across the country aren't, and it's still a bit confusing to get into crypto for a lot of people and really know what to do when it goes beyond taking it off a platform. So I love the idea. I just want to see custody expand and grow and have more take up for our Canadian custodial solutions, and then see a framework that allows them to progress, right? Because this circles back to the staking argument as well, but staking and how do we get into other aspects of crypto in a safe, responsible manner? That's probably the place to start.
Yeah, you've raised a number of different really interesting issues. Derivatives. So yeah, crypto derivatives. So what I see are a bunch of TradFi innovations and artificial financial engineering being moved over into crypto, and of course that's a regulated activity. How can it not be? I know that there are some really unique aspects to digital currency and digital assets that are very unique. We've never seen this before, but when we're taking concepts from TradFi like derivatives and moving them over, it's how can they not be subject to regulation? And derivatives in Canada is actually really confusing. Derivatives are securities in Alberta. Derivatives aren't included in the definition of a security in Ontario, and so there are blanket orders in some of the Western provinces that provide exemptions for people trading in derivatives. That doesn't apply to people in Ontario. I think there's going to be further guidance that's going to come out in the future on derivatives in Ontario that'll kind of clarify some issues. But I don't know. There's other assets too, like stable coins where I really think there's a lot of different opinions, and you know, I've had an experience with a client who developed a Canadian dollar backed stablecoin, and I mean the position of the OSC was pretty clear. It's a security, right? And even though it's not algorithmic, so but there's been no official guidance published on that issue. So it would be nice to just get some uniformity and get some clarity on things like crypto derivatives. Exactly how are we gonna how are these going to be regulated, right? Can we use the blanket order exemption in the Western provinces? Do they apply? I mean, that's great work, great questions for lawyers. Sorry, so who wants to go first with this issue? Because these are it's a
I'd
huge
echo
issue.
a lot of what was just said. I mean, for me, the future, I think, as you mentioned, like staking, lending, is probably somewhere they're going to get sooner rather than later. And whether it's the securities commissions, the banks, we'll see where it comes from. But I think we've already heard musings like with the European Central Bank that it's somewhere they're going to go. The SEC's made vague comments about DeFi. And you think that's probably where they're focused. So I do think that's sort of the next one. I mean, stable coins are interesting. You and I have had that conversation about we would have, from a securities point of view, have thought that if it was 100% staked to a currency, maybe it's a currency because it's acting more like a currency. That's how people are using it. But no, maybe not.
Or
so
is it evidence of indebtedness?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So I get my dollar and then I'm in, the platform's indebted to me. Evidence of indebtedness is one of the prongs in the definition of a security.
Yeah, and I think they'll follow the same approach that they have. They're not going to put brand new rules in place. They're going to fit it into their current framework. The same we've seen with NFTs, we've seen with coins, with exchanges. But some clarity would be helpful. So, a comment letter coming out, I mean, it would be great to see in those areas.
Totally agree.
A little bit of a change here, but one of the things that I find interesting, and historically, if you wanted to invest in royalties, you would have to do it through the oil and gas company or through Warner Films or through Universal, what have you. With the NFTs, you can now directly invest in royalties. And it's remarkable what's happening in the film industry and the music industry. Drake led the way where he said, look, I'll give up 10% of my royalties. And of course, it's blockchain. So the people that participate in that get paid directly from the smart contract. And now big film companies, if you got a $50 million or $100 million budget and you're short 20%, you could go pre-sell the royalty stream. And then we have a opportunity to participate in the next Game of Thrones or something like that. I just think that that's really, really interesting.
Katrina, final thoughts? Ben, I think we've got like a minute left.
I definitely think that the derivatives guidance and sort of development in that space is what's got to come next. I think we'll see the staking sort of terms and conditions or guidance coming out shortly on that. But I think from an industry perspective, that's definitely where industry wants to move. And I think the current framework obviously does not permit that, the current crypto regulatory framework. So I think it'll be a matter of working with collaboratively with the regulators to help evolve that framework, particularly in that area.
Thank you. Excellent. Ben, final word. Anything that you want to say before we wrap it up?
Sure. I just go further on the derivatives and just sort of a reminder or comment that like the reason they're so interesting is as a hedging instrument, right? I know first thoughts for everybody, maybe regulatory is, people are going to want leverage. But I look at how like firms like ours trade and just that like the perpetual swap markets are huge compared to the swap markets on most of the exchanges. And I think everyone deserves the opportunity to be able to hedge their risks somewhat and protect their portfolios too.
Yeah, power to the people, right? That's what cryptocurrency does. It gives people the tools to do what we could, the average person couldn't do 20 years ago, right? Like, so for better or for worse. But no, okay. Well, I want to thank everyone here. I thought this was a great panel. It was my pleasure moderating. Thank you. And we'll be around, I think, for a little bit, some of us after, if you have any questions, but otherwise, couple questions. Okay. You don't want me to throw this. Oh, okay.
Hello? Thank you. So I'm wondering, how do you keep up with all the new regulations and how do you learn more about like what is actually being regulated from someone who isn't a lawyer. So like, for example, myself, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't have that kind of background.
Twitter.
I say,
Um,
I'm not a lawyer. Should I take this?
yeah.
This is why I say we talk with our in-house counsel, but no, like it takes a lot of work to get up to speed at first, right? You got to go find the relevant acts and read through them and try to make sure you understand. And then, yeah, actually, crypto Twitter is surprisingly good for
If you
this and
follow
building
right.
communities to just bounce the info back and forth.
You
With
gotta
caution.
follow the right people.
But that's right. Like if you read the baseline acts and worked hard to understand those, I think you find that most of the guidance that comes out isn't that hard to interpret, right? It actually, like when the big newsletter or when the big announcements came up in CSA a couple of years ago, almost like the majority of that really naturally fell out from all the acts that were in place already. There was only one or two things that were really unique twists because they were just trying to figure out how to deal with crypto and settlement on the blockchain.
Yeah, you could Google CSA staff notices crypto and then read the publicly available Canadian Securities Administrator staff notices on crypto, and you can get up to speed that way on Canada's position.
I just add that most law firms, most large law firms have people who are doing this, and they put out free publications all the time. So you can check out legal websites and just type in like digital assets, crypto assets, blockchain, and you'll find great articles. And we put out a couple a week probably. So there's a ton of stuff on there. So lots of free resources on the web as well.
Osler, BLG, Miller, Thomson, our law firms will have lots of thought pieces and news and updates. Katrina?
Yeah, no, I was going to say the exact same thing. That's a great source of information. I think the law firm publications plus the websites of the various commissions. I mean, I think they put a lot of work into explaining things in plain English as best as possible, and that's a good source as well.
Oh, someone's going to ask something.
There's got to be a lover boy question follow up
lawyers.
here.
Free legal advice.
Thank you. You guys may have touched on this earlier. In Quebec, we saw a lot of regulatory changes around crypto due to the energy. How do you see that transferring over maybe on a federal level, or how do you see that kind of being combated in the future when crypto obviously takes up more energy and the governments may try to stifle that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. Well, it depends on what province you're in. Each province has its own energy, electricity consumption regulations, hydroelectric act, Alberta, Ontario. There's, our Alberta Utilities Commission would regulate crypto miners in Alberta, Ontario Energy Board in Ontario. So I think it's not province by province.
I would say my impression, is that miners are aware of the question of energy use generally. And I think we will start seeing solutions. People are really innovative and they'll start seeing new things. I know Alberta, there has, a lot of people using the infrastructure that already exists here. So I'm sure, the Quebec decision did not help miners in that province by any means. I don't know if that means people more in other jurisdictions or not. But I think the question of climate change, ESG, and the industry is probably a live question that we'll see more and more innovation around.
Yeah. I mean, the Quebec decision, I don't know if it won't directly affect miners in Alberta, but there is a bigger question, I think, to your question, an underlying issue on consumption and whether we should be devoting that much energy use to crypto assets mining. I think we should. But, any other? Or is that's it? Kate? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panel this morning.